Brew Strong is brought to you by Blickman Engineering, home of the Riptide. Visit them online at blickmanengineering.com.
Brewers, it's time for the beer radio you've been looking for. This is the show that dispels myths, tackles the toughest topics, and makes no apologies for geeking out on beer. Hosted by two guys that drink before they think, Jamil Zainasheff and John Palmer. This is Brew Strong.
Hey, howdy. Hey, my brewing brothers and sisters.
Greetings, cretins.
All right. Back in the studio, our prospective studios, John in Tasmania, me in Heretic, and we're ready to have fun yet again. How you been doing, John?
I've been doing well. I'm now fully vaccinated. 2 weeks gone by.
You got the rabies vaccine? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do they know? That's not forgotten the scientific term for rabies, but immaterial. Things have been going great. Weather's been good. Bear problems are minimal with the garbage cans. So yeah, can't complain.
There you go. As long as your bear problems are minimal, I think life is going well.
Yeah. You know someone else that has minimal bear problems?
Our good friend John Blickman.
Yes. Not many bears in Indiana.
There aren't?
No, not really. I mean, what few there are, they're regularly shot. So, or at least around John's place.
How many bears has John shot?
I'm not sure. We'll have to get more recent numbers from him.
We will have to get up-to-date numbers on this. The fans want to know. But the other thing the fans want to know is Blickman Engineering, blickmanengineering.com or blickman.com. It's blickmanengineering.com.
Right. Anvil.com.
Anvil.com. They make some wonderful brewing equipment for everything from home brewers, just starting out, to professional level equipment. If you are looking to start your pro brewery or just up your game as a home brewer, check out Blickman Engineering. They got some great stuff, great people, very clever, very innovative. I would say of all the equipment manufacturers in the world, Blickman Engineering has had the biggest effect on just the way of thinking and changing perceptions of the brewing equipment. So check them out. Good people. They pay for the show, so you don't have to. You could send a nice note to feedback@blickmanengineering.com and tell John how much you appreciate that he's paid for the show that you listen to for free. Today, welcome our fine guest, Mr. Fal Allen from Anderson Valley Brewing Company. Fal is a long-time industry person who has been brewing all over the world, for one, and author of some fine books and articles, and just an all-around really wonderful person. And it's good to see you, Fal.
It's good to see you guys. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the next hour or so.
Yeah. What we wanted to talk about today, Anderson Valley, especially since you've come back, has really been known for some great kettle-based sours. Your Gose line, for example. So, how did you guys start going down that road? I mean, what happened? What drove you that way?
It was very serendipitous. We had a lab guy, a guy named Andy Hooper, who is now head brewer at Seismic Brewing in Santa Rosa. You'll pour one of these while we talk.
Nice.
And Andy came to me one day and he said, "Hey, I want to do like a sour mash beer, like, you know, they do for whiskey. And I'd tried that once before with horrible results. And I said, sure, knock yourself out, Andy. Let's see what we can do. And so he decided he wanted to do an 8-barrel batch. That's our kind of our medium-sized pilot system. And we brewed an 8-barrel batch. And it took a couple days to get it to sour. And at the end of those days, it had an interesting kind of Foot Locker meets gym sock kind of aroma. And I was like, well, let's go ahead and boil it and see where, that ends up. And it didn't get any better. And we fermented it and it didn't get any better. And we ultimately dumped it, which, as you know, as brewers, we don't like to dump beer. Mm-hmm. It's got to be pretty bad before I'm like, well, we're going to feed it to the cows. Usually you can find something to do with it, even if it's, give it to your friends you don't like. After that, I said, Andy, what do you think went wrong? And Andy's a really smart guy. And he said, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. And I thought, if Andy's going to find out, I better do some research. I better do some reading and be able to, intelligently discuss this with him. So about a week later, we came back and talked it out and came up with some ideas of how we might mitigate that and what had caused that kind of cheesy foot aroma. And we came actually to pretty similar conclusions. And as we were sitting around talking about it over a few beers, my next door neighbor, who's a home brewer and used to be a professional brewer, a guy named Mike Luparello, comes up and he's listening and he says, that sounds like an awesome way to make a Gose. And both Andy and I looked at him and said, what are you talking about? He said, Gose. Have you never heard of Gose? It's a German sour beer style. And I said, shut up. Germans don't make sour beer. Little did I know. So both Andy and I did more research, and we came back and we agreed that might be a good style to try this new kind of process we talked about. So we brewed another batch, and this time we brewed it with the intention of making a Gose. We used a little salt, a little coriander, and we made pretty interesting beer. And I thought, this is our original, the Holy Gose. And I thought, wow, this is fun. Who knew? And turns out actually more people than just Mike Luparello knew about this beer. But most people didn't. It was not a well-known style. I think the only people that I know that was doing it before we were is Westbrook, although I'm sure there were others. But nobody was really making a lot of it. And I thought, fun style. No one's going to drink this except me and Andy and Mike Luparello and maybe a couple other people. And that would be that. We'd never brew it again. But the then owner thought it had some legs. He thought this is going to go somewhere. And I thought, you stupid. But he was right. We started making it and quickly went from our 8-barrel system to a much larger system, a 100-barrel system. And we started making Gose and people started buying it. Mm-hmm. And after about a year, we decided that, it was common. I'd done a bunch of research at that point, and it was common for people to add flavorings to the Gose like they did with Berliner Weiss. Mm-hmm. The flavorings were actually, Berliner Weiss often was Woodruff, and there weren't very many flavorings that they'd use. But Gose, it turns out they did all kinds of, things. At the point of dispense. And I thought, well, we're not going to be able to control that. We're not going to be able to send Woodruff syrup out with a keg of Gose. So why don't we try putting fruit in there beforehand and see how people like that? And so we tried blood orange first. We have now tried pretty much every fruit on the planet that I can get in any sort of quantity. And I think there are a few more that we'll come out with one day in the future. But really the best ones were the blood orange was by far everybody's favorite. And I think the next one that we came out with was the watermelon. Mm-hmm. And that is just, it's a natural flavor pairing and very popular for us. And then the owner at the time, he wanted to make a rosé kind of wine-based drink. And so we tried that, and we tried I don't know, 5 or 6 iterations of that, and none of them were very good. And one of our brewers, Peter, came up and said, I can do this. After, having tried it a bunch of times, we're like, all right, go ahead, see what you can do, show us. And he got raspberries and rose hips, and was able to make a beer that I think, it has this kind of awesome raspberry aroma and a little bit of flavor. And then it really does have kind of this rosé wine character to it. So that's another one that we do a lot of.
Nice.
Were your initial rosé trials with grapes?
Yeah, we initially tried with grapes, and we've made some good wild ferment grape beer combos. There are a lot of wineries in the valley here where we are, 40 something, and we've collaborated with a couple of them where they bring must in, and we would make a beer to go. What they do is they get a bin, they let it go. Sometimes they'd pitch yeast, sometimes they wouldn't, depending on what winery. They would then press it, and some wines get pressed lightly, so there's a lot of must still in there. So they'd bring those bins to us. We'd run beer on top of that, and then let it go for about another week. That's a whole kind of different beer process. You're dealing with a lot of different bacteria, and so we didn't want to do that process. We wanted to use the kettle souring process. And I think, for the listeners, it's really important to understand that kettle souring is not like barrel souring. They are two completely different animals, and there's things that are in between that, that you can do. But really, when people say, oh, kettle souring is cheating, well, if you're going to make a barrel-aged sour beer and you start with a kettle sour beer, that's cheating. Mm-hmm. But, there's such different processes, and they bring about, different flavor profiles. Right. They're not really the same thing. So it's not really cheating unless, of course, you're trying to pass it off as a barrel-aged beer, which is
right. I think the general consumer is not really, or I'll say a lot of people are not familiar with the difference between barrel-aged and kettle sours. And so they think it's the same thing, yet there's
just sour
this
beer.
Wild price difference between the two. And, so I think that may be part of people's, concern there. But I agree with you. I think the only cheating is either adding lactic acid, pouring that into a beer and calling that a sour. I've seen that before, and that's disgusting. And like you're saying, you take a kettle sour and then you put it in the barrel and call it a barrel-aged sour. It's like, well, I guess you could call it a barrel-aged kettle sour. Kind of a new combination of techniques. I've seen that too, and that as long as you're clear as to what you're providing the consumer, I think that's fine. Well, and that brings me to one of many questions, which is, so the way that we do kettle sours now is, we did the inoculated with sour mash and drain it off and all that, and trying to blanket it with argon and all that. And you get some funk, which in the right amount of funk is fine. But
right.
What we do now is we do a regular mash. We, move the wort to the kettle, and we give it a quick boil to kill off any bacteria that's in there. And then we'll run it through the heat exchanger back into the kettle to drop the temperature down to around 100 Fahrenheit. And then we will pitch a culture of lactobacillus into the wort, and we'll leave it for 24 hours. And when we come back, it's pretty much down around 3.2 pH. And then we'll give it a boil again. And if we want to add any hops or anything else, we could do that at that time. Then we transfer it over to a fermenter, and we pitch our regular yeast, our 001 or whatever we're going to do, and ferment it out, add any fruit, carbonate, package, and that's pretty much the whole process. Is that essentially what you guys are doing, or you invented some other way of doing this?
We I don't know, invented sounds so like planned. Now, mind you, I outline all the methods of doing it that I know of in this book here. Happens to be a great book. Everyone should own it.
Yeah, where's my Gose book? What do you do with it?
In fact, anybody who mails me a $20 check, I'll sign a copy and send it to them.
My copy is not signed, Fal.
I will sign it for you.
Saying.
Yeah. But so we have come up with kind of a different way. The way you're doing it is probably the most common way that of brewers that I've talked to.
Mm-hmm.
And they're, brewers are inventive folks, particularly older brewers who had to start off with equipment that may not have been meant for brewing beer, or home brewers. They are used to making their own equipment or finding out ways to do things. So some of the younger brewers have, come to work and there's nice shiny equipment there already. Us older folks, we, found dairy equipment or, made our own kettles out of kegs or whatever. But we came up with a method where we high gravity brew.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll do like you do. We'll do a regular mash and we'll do regular runoff. And the beer will then be higher than the gravity we hope to achieve. And we will then use house water to cool the beer down as well as bring the gravity down to where it should be. And we'll add the lactic acid bacteria then. And we put in a big pitch, quite a bit of lactic acid bacteria. We want to sour in less than 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important for a couple reasons. But one of them is that a lot of times the quicker you drop the pH, the sooner the pH gets below, and I don't remember the numbers exactly, but in the book, the sooner the pH gets down far enough, those gym sock aroma producing bacteria are unable to grow. Mm-hmm. So quickly dropping the pH is important. We also blanket the top of the kettle there with argon, and that helps to exclude some of the oxygen. Those bacteria that make that aroma require oxygen, and they require a higher pH. So a big pitch helps you reduce the pH quickly. The argon, I'm not really sure it does a whole lot, but makes us feel better. And I think it excludes some oxygen. And then the rest of the process is just like yours. Once we hit our target pH, which is usually in about 12 to 18 hours, then we boil, add whatever hops we're going to add. We then cool it, ferment it, and we add the salt at the very end for a couple reasons. One, that yeast is already burnt from the sour, so we can't ever repitch it. I mean, we've tried; it does make beer, it just doesn't make good beer. But we're worried that the salt will even further damage and actually be a problem during the fermentation. Sure. So we add it after it's fermented. We add it, if there's a fruit addition, we add it with the fruit. And we add the fruit and the salt on the very last day of fermentation. And what we find is that the yeast absorb that sugar, even if they're not actively fermenting and producing CO2. They absorb the sugar from the fruit, take it on board. So you actually see a rise in the gravity, and then it actually drops, and usually below where you added it. So there's very little sugar left in there. Ending up with a nice dry beer. Salt doesn't affect the yeast. And also, salt and stainless, probably never really a good idea. And salt and stainless in a low pH is even worse. And salt in low pH stainless when it's hot. So if you're putting the salt in the kettle and then running it through your heat exchanger, I think that's going to be some problems. Maybe not in the first year or two, but probably down the line, you'll find pitting in your heat exchanger. So we try and minimize our contact time and the parameters for that salt addition.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
All right. Let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll have more with Val Allen about Gose right after this.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Are you looking for a simple brewing system that's great for all grain brewing, but everything on the market seems to be full of compromises? Blickman Engineering has the answer. The Blickman Brew Easy All Grain Brewing System. The Brew Easy is a complete system with easy upgrades and a beautiful compact design, perfect for any size brewing location. At its core, the Brew Easy is built on two gorgeous Blickman Boilermaker brew kettles, a high-temperature March pump, and either a top-tier gas burner or the new Boil Coil electric heater. The Brew Easy adapter lid allows the pots to stack on top of each other, forming an efficient, strong, and compact brewing setup that comes in 5, 10, and 20-gallon batch sizes. Upgrade your Brew Easy system with full automated control by adding a Blickman Tower of Power temp controller, and make moving around easy with the Blickman Kettle Cart. The Brew Easy is modular. If you already own a Boilermaker kettle, you can build your Brew Easy by purchasing just the modules you need. The new Brew Easy all-grain brewing system. See it today at BlickmanEngineering.com and brew with Blickman quality on your new Brew Easy.
Learning to brew has never been so disgusting. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back. We're talking with Hal Allen, author of Gose, a fine book, brewmaster at Anderson Valley Brewing Company, purveyors of fine Gose. And we're talking about the process that you use. And one of the things that has come up recently is using a GMO yeast for souring. I think it's Lallemand.
Mm-hmm.
And they
Sour
have
Vesa.
Right. Sour Vesier.
That's it.
And so it's a GMO yeast where they've put a lactate gene from some food microorganism, which so it sours as you ferment. So you don't kettle sour it. You just pitch this as your yeast, and it produces lactic acid, and there's no bacteria to worry about, and you're all done. I've heard of a number of brewers doing this, and the thing that stopped me is, personally, GMO doesn't bother me. I'm like, I'm old. What difference is it going to make? And most of these things I think are fine. But, I'm concerned about, our consumers being upset with it, or, having an issue with it. Yeah. And I think if you're going to use something like that, you better disclose it to people that that's what you're using. And I think a lot of people aren't. I know people are just using it and not saying anything. What's your feeling on that?
Well, again, for folks that are, less experienced brewers or non-brewers, the reason that brewers like kettle souring, well, there's a bunch of reasons, but one of them is it's fast, but it's also safe. So when you work in the brew house and you add that bacteria, which you don't want in your cellar. Lactic acid bacteria is the bane of the brewer's existence. All the beer spoilers that you really don't want are usually lactic acid bacteria of some sort, Pediococcus being one of the worst. But we use a lactobacillus in the brew house, and when you boil it, that stuff is dead. You have killed it. And when you send it through your heat exchanger and over into your brew house, you can be relatively confident that you're not going to have any contamination. I would worry about a yeast strain that produces lactic acid. You probably, if you do things right, aren't going to see any cross-contamination. But you now have, a acid-producing yeast that could get cross-contaminated into your other batches. That happens quite frequently in breweries. and you're putting it down your drain, and you're getting it on your floor, and it's being tracked around everywhere. So in our brewery, we spend some time trying not to cross-contaminate things. So I would be a little bit worried about that myself. Anytime we bring in another yeast strain into the brewery, all the brewers are a little more cautious, a little more worried about cross-contamination. So that's my only real thought about that.
Yeah, yet another reason to be careful about something like that. Yeah, I don't know, how I feel about it. I just think, and every brewer should do what they think is right. But for me, it's like, I'd have to tell people, not, I'd be fine with it, but, I just worry about, things like that. People are worried about nickel in wheat and oats. So people are asking me about what beers of ours have wheat and oats, because wheat and oats are high nickel content grains. Apparently there's some foods that have higher levels of nickel than other foods.
Still parts per million.
Right. But they're saying that there are people with severe nickel allergies that have to be careful about the foods they eat. Which, at first I was like, oh, please. And then I did a little bit of research. I'm like, okay, I can see how that could be a possibility. So, it's just little things like that we're finding out. And I don't know. Me, I eat anything. If I have problems with it, well, that's just the way it is. But I think you just got to be really careful about that sort of thing today.
Yeah, I agree that a lot of people write to us about the GMO thing. So that would definitely be a concern about using that yeast. And, I'm sure you guys are the same way. When you choose a yeast, you look very carefully at the flavor components it's going to make and the behavior of it, its flocculation, the attenuation, all those different things. So I don't know about this souring yeast, but we really like our house yeast and the flavors it makes. Mm-hmm. So I'd be reticent to try a new yeast that I was unfamiliar with and maybe not like the flavors it produced.
Right.
Maybe not.
So, Val, when you're doing your souring step, you said 12 to 18 hours. What sort of temperature are you using there? And how important is temperature into that souring process?
Temperature is pretty important. We've fiddled around with that a little bit in the beginning, but sub 100 F took a longer time, didn't get as good results. And getting above about 115 seems to have similar issues. You actually kill off some of the yeast, the bacteria at that point. So we try and keep it in between 100 and 110, in the upper range there, 108, somewhere in there. So it happens quickly, but it's not so hot that it's going to damage the bacteria. Also, the warmer it is, the less time it's going to take you then to bring it up to a boil. And the warmer it is, also the less you have to worry about losing. You got a big thermal mass, but you are going to lose some temperature over those 12 to 24 hours. So if you go in at 110 and, by the time you're done, it's 100, that's not a problem. But if you go in at 100, the time you're done, it's in the high 80s, that could be an issue.
I want to ask you, Val, about your temperature control. You say that you use house water to bring the wort down to this pitching temperature of 108. Do you also utilize your heat exchanger in that process? No.
No, we, the brewers have to kind of make, rule of thumb kind of calculation during winter and during summer as to how much, temperature they're gonna lose there. But by and large, they've gotten pretty good at it. So they, add the water, and that water mixes pretty good in there. And if they have to, they can turn the kettle on and reheat some. But really, they're shooting for the gravity more than the temperature. So we get to our correct gravity, and then we take a temperature reading. And if that's right, then we move forward with pitching. If it's off, we can heat up or cool down a little bit. And again, as I said, if it's a little too high, we're not really concerned. So, if they get to the gravity and we're at 112, I'm not so worried about it. If they were up in the 120s, I'd be more worried about it. So, but they're really shooting for a gravity drop, and our groundwater is fairly consistent. So that comes out to be a fairly consistent temperature.
Okay. Jamil, do you use your heat exchanger or no?
Yeah, we do. So what we do is essentially, shoot for the gravity we're looking for, and then we just send it through the heat exchanger and then back into the kettle. So we can kind of dial it in that way.
Two ways to skin the cat.
Right. Yeah, there are many ways. I talked to brewers, and I was really surprised at the innovation. Some people really have come up with some unusual ways. And another thing, the reason that we don't run it through the heat exchanger, two main reasons. One, we're lazy. We don't have to CIP the heat exchanger again. And two, I like a little of the funk. And if you get a quick souring, a quick drop of that pH, and you can do it in a good manner, you get a tiny little bit of funk that way that is a little easier to control. But as Jamil said, if you're doing more than 24 hours of souring, then the potential for getting funk gets, it grows exponentially. So you don't want to do that process and then wait 3 days. Like I know some brewers that do, and they make good beer, but it's a little funky.
And then, so you mentioned using a lactobacillus. We use Plantarum, which we found the best results with. Do you have a specific strain that you prefer?
We use Delbrooki,
mm-hmm.
Delbrooki, depending. Mm-hmm. And we experimented with some, and I think that if you're making a more nuanced Gose, like one with no fruit, and it's not a big beer, and you want to go for some of those flavors, I think the difference in the lactic acid you use can give you different flavor components. Mm-hmm. But if you're making a giant Gose or a Gose that's filled with fruit, I think those differences are going to be pretty much, covered by the rest of the process. And at that point, you're just looking for which one works best for you. Sour is the quickest, is most available, is cheapest in your area. So, I think there are reasons to try different ones depending on the kind of beer you make. But if you're just making a giant fruit bomb, any of those should work good for you.
I will tell you a story about okay. I did a collaboration brew with Fuller's of London. And so the beer we're going to do, we're just like, all right, so we're not just going to do IPA or, a bitter or something like that, or porter. We're going to do a Gose. And we decided to do a blackberry Gose at Fuller's, a kettle sour at Fuller's. And I went there, and they, part of it was the culture to add, and they looked at like buying, Plantarum, and it was going to be like, $10,000 or $20,000 because it's 250 barrels, like 250 UK barrels, I think, of volume that we were going to do. And so they went and got a Plantarum supplement at one of the local shops and grew it up from a capsule in their lab. They grew it up into like 20 of these, corny kegs. And so we had to figure out a way to cool down 250 barrels or 200 barrels of wort down to the souring temperature, and that was an adventure. But we rerouted pipes, and we got that working, got that done, and then we had to change the software because the German software that they had was set up for the way they brew and batch numbers, and you can't take something out of a kettle and put it back into a kettle, because that's a no-no. The numbering doesn't work that way. It doesn't know that it lives in the kettle. And then we pitched the corny kegs of bacteria, and it all turned out great. And I know there were people there that were totally freaked out about the fact that we were dumping bacteria into the brewery, but we did it, and nothing happened.
Well, I have to admit, I'm jealous that you got to brew at Fuller's.
Right.
Quite a treat.
Oh, I got a whole story about me being in the brewer booth when tourists came by and were like taking pictures of me as the brewer there at Fuller's. It was experience of a lifetime. I really got to thank those guys for that. And it was a Gose.
Yeah.
And it wasn't enough blackberry. I knew it wasn't going to be enough blackberry. Just, one of those things. But anyways, so they were able to grow it up from a nutritional supplement that they found. They're like, yeah, it cost us 5 pounds. So that's one way. And I run across brewers in the past who have thrown in yogurt and used yogurt. That I'm not sure about that. What's your thoughts on using, yogurt?
Now, I don't want to disparage any breweries who may be doing this. I have had beers, kettle sour beers made with yogurt that I liked quite a bit. So it is a doable thing. We didn't want to go with yogurt for a couple reasons. One, and I do know a lot of brewers that use plantarum. In fact, most of the brewers I think use plantarum, and they grow them up from supplements, Good Bellies or any number of ones out there. And I think that's a much better way than yogurt. Yogurt, you got a few issues. One, you're putting milk into your beer, and that can have downstream issues. And honestly, as you were talking about earlier, you should be telling your consumers that this beer has lactose in it. Because if you're lactose intolerant, like dramatically lactose intolerant, that could be a problem for you. So there's that. There's a labeling issue. Secondly, you never know what's in yogurt. Even if you go to the producer and they tell you what's in it, they may change their type of lactic acid bacteria at any given time for any reason, and your beer may end up tasting differently. So you have less control over it that way. And they may also be using multiple kinds at any given time. So you might end up with different, proportional amounts. I get it. It's cheap, but with a little extra effort, it can be just as cheap to buy a supplement and grow it up.
Yeah. The beers I've tasted like that, they do kind of have a bit of a, yogurty kind of character. It has that same sour culture as yogurts. And like Fal's saying, I think a lot of times they use a blend of cultures in yogurt to ensure that they get quite the rapid souring as well. So
question. How do you go about growing up a culture from a supplement?
I've never done it from a supplement, but we get a pitch from White Labs. We use their bacteria, and I assume it's the same kind of way. You just get some reasonably mid-ranged wort, and we pitch the bacteria in that at a good temperature. We have a little fermenter that we do it in, and you grow it up in there. You just keep it warm, and if you need to, keep it agitated, although with bacteria, that's less of an issue because it's so light. And it'll, double, I don't know how many dozens of times.
Do you have any kind of N number that you're looking for in terms of growth? How do you quantify this? How would another brewery or a home brewer quantify how much growth is necessary?
Well, it depends on the bacteria you're using. We go by the same rule of thumb as yeast. So it's 1 million cells per milliliter, per degree Plato. And we go a little high on that end. So it may be slightly more than that. That's kind of the number we're looking for. that we want to pitch in. And again, we're looking for really rapid pH drop. We're a production brewery, and we need to be able to get through those things in and out of the brew house, and certainly within 24 hours. I think if you have more time, you could try different methods or maybe pitch less. But if you're going to grow your bacteria up, you might as well go for a big number and a big pitch and just get things done quicker.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Well, I think temperature plays a big role in it too. The times when, friends of mine have had trouble, I asked them, they're like, it's taking a long time. They started around 100 degrees, just a little bit lower than I would have started. And they're like, well, I'm worried because I was told, it doesn't work over, 105 or 100. Or works best at 90 something, and I'm not really sure that's true. Maybe it works best at 90 something, but you just get far more rapid growth and far more rapid souring at a higher temperature. Another 10 degrees Fahrenheit, I think, makes all the difference in the world. All right, let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll have more questions for Fal right after this.
Back to the beer guys that make other beer guys look like wine guys. Brew strong.
All right, we're back. We're talking Gose with Fal Allen. I wanted to tell you, if you are looking to brew some Gose, you might check out our good friends at Brew Chatter, Josh and RJ. They have all sorts of great Gose brewing ingredients, everything from the bacteria to the malt to the fruit to whatever you want to do. They've got it, and the knowledge to help you brew some excellent beers. So check them out. Brewchatter.com. They're up there near Reno and Sparks, Nevada. Great little place. I was just up there for Big Brew Day, the AHA Big Brew Day, and had a wonderful time. They had a chair for me. I sat down. I relaxed. I drank lots of beer. Ate lots of food. It was pretty wonderful. It was my kind of brew day, where I watched everybody else brew, and I just kind of sat around. Is that how you brew now, Fal? Is that what you do? You sit around, watch everybody brew?
I do sit around, but I don't watch everybody brew. Other people get to brew. Had a funny thing. We have a brewer here we hired about 8 months, a year ago. Good guy named Scott, came to us from Ukiah Brewing Company. And the other morning I said to my girlfriend, I'm going into work and Scott's going to teach me how to brew. And she said, what? Wait a minute. What? I said, well, honestly, I don't get to brew on the big system very much. Mm-hmm. And it's a complicated system. And I just need a refresher. So I go in and Scott, walks me through, mm-hmm. How we do things and, which valves are operated by which buttons. And it's a funky system. So there are a lot of weird kind of quirks to it, which if you don't brew on it all the time, you forget. So I got retraining. In fact, I'm in the middle of retraining. I'll be doing it for the next few weeks. Learning how.
I got the same thing. I specified how I wanted this brewery, this brew plant. I installed it or helped install it. I helped get the thing started up. I've gone through all this. I know intimately how every wire connects and yet it's just like, if I had to brew on it, it'd take me a minute, it's just, it's not that simple. But I also believe it's like, look, I can figure it out. There's not, I know enough about brewing. I know enough about the equipment. Just step back and give me a moment.
Wort should not be squirting out of that pipe. I
would figure it out. It may take me a turn or two, but I'll get it done. I know what I'm doing.
I don't want an 8-hour brew day to be a 12-hour brew day. So
it would be, they'd be 18-hour brew days, but 18. pH. When you're making your Gose, do do you target different pHs for different fruits, or do you go with one pH, or a fruited versus an unfruited? Do you have any, targets that you're really shooting for?
We do have targets. It's one pH for all the Goses. So we do make a beer that is not a Gose, that is kettle soured, tropical hazy sour. We try and shoot for a higher pH with this beer because I don't want the sourness to be quite as intense. So that's the only beer that we do where we're shooting for a different pH. The Goses are all trying to get in somewhere above 3.2, but below 3.38, 3.5. So it's a little bit of a range. And we find that once you drop below 3.2, things begin to get a little more bitey than I like. It's pretty intense. And anything above 3.4.5, 3.5 just doesn't seem intense enough, so that you don't kind of quite get the impact. And the beer ends up being a little, I guess, flabby is kind of how I describe it. So 3.2, 3.3, up to 3.4, but somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I told the Fullers, I'm just like, don't worry, the plant term will stop right around 3.2, and they were just like, no, this isn't going to stop. It's going to keep going. I'm like, no, it'll stop. And next morning it was, like 18 hours later, it was right at 3.2, and it's a little bit above 3.2. I'm like, perfect.
Yeah.
I really, it's kind of, it does have some self-limiting nature to it, the bacteria that we're using. And I haven't seen any get, further down than like 3.1 or so.
Yeah, 3.1 is getting down there.
Yeah.
We try not to get below 3.2, but we've had a couple sneak by. The brewer comes in the morning, they're like, bah! Our brewer starts pretty early. He starts at 2 a.m, but sometimes he comes in and it's a little low. Now, we have the advantage of doing we have two kettles. So we do 2 batches at the same time. And when one of them is, gets down below, hopefully the other one is still on, working its way down, and we can boil and stop it sooner and then
blend.
I don't think we've ever had to post brew house blend anything, but occasionally we do have to, blend the 2 kettles together to get a pH that's in the, the 2.8 range. And that's kind of what we're shooting for, 2.8 and 3.
Okay. And then what about water chemistry?
I always refer to John on all questions of water chemistry of any sort.
I mean, is there like a certain balance you want to shoot for? We're adding the salt for the Gose. How is that related to the water chemistry? Do you adjust your water chemistry beforehand to be more sodium heavy and less gypsum, or do you how are you trying to balance out your water, or are you just taking what the city gives you and pumping that through?
Well, unfortunately, there is no city to give us.
It's nature.
Yeah, we have 10 wells on our property. And all the water in our brewing process comes from our wells. And most of the wells are pretty consistent. We have consistently hard water. And I think that makes some nice beer, but it does have a lot of problems associated with it. We get a lot of scaling. Sometimes our pH needs, in fact, all the time, we need to acidify the water and the pH of the water to get our mash pHs in the right range. We don't do anything particularly special for the Goses as opposed to the other beers. We do acidify the mash and the water a little bit, and are mindful of that so we get a good, a nice mash runoff. But after that, we just kind of go with what we got. And John and I have discussed this, and it makes my head hurt mostly when we talk about water. I recognize that water is very important, and that to be a good brewer, you need to understand these sorts of things, and you need to have good water. But there are a lot of variations in water, and you can make good beer with a lot of them. So I think most people who worry too much about it just are worrying too much. If you like the way your water tastes when you drink it, it's going to make good beer. And then when you go to make specific styles, like when we make a porter, we do a lot more water treatment. But with Gose, it's pretty forgiving, I think. Forgiving beer style.
What do you think, John? What's your take on?
Well, in general, I agree with Fowl. The key, the number one reason to adjust brewing water is mash pH. So you dial in your mash pH. There's 90% of your task. From there, you can manipulate sulfate and chloride, to accentuate beer flavors. In the case of Gose, with all sours, I think generally we're looking for a soft sour. So we don't want a lot of mineral in the water because that tends to make it a little more harsh. And you are going to be adding, sodium chloride, table salt, rock salt, and but not horrendous amounts. You are trying to sweeten the malt character to give some more backbone to that sour. Generally, you want 50 to say 75 ppms of calcium. If you have to add, calcium chloride or calcium sulfate to get those levels, you're still only adding relatively low amounts of calcium and the chloride and sulfate ions. So when it comes time to add, I don't know how much salt you're adding, Fowl, 2%, something like that, of sodium to bump up those numbers. You're really not concerned about the previous chloride and sulfate levels in the water.
There you go. All right. We need to take one more short break. And if you're listening live, you can always ask questions. Just put them in the comments section there and catch those. And you can ask your questions that way. Or, you can always send them in to brewstrong@thebrewingnetwork.com, and we'll get those questions for you in the future, like in the next show. Who knows? So let's do this. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, I want to also ask Fowl about the amounts of salt and hops. We'll be back right after this.
Back to the two guys that know how to turn beer into beer. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back. We're talking Gose with Fowl Allen of Anderson Valley Brewing Company. And before the break, we're talking about, water adjustments for Gose. One question and one thing that always gets me is coriander and salt. Traditional in Gose, Gose, one of the very first guys to be brewing Gose commercially in the United States was Jeff Griffith of, I can't remember what the brewery was then. And then he was on to Fate Brewing. Great guy. And he would brew Gose after Gose after Gose. And he'd send them to me, or I'd be out there and we'd taste these things and make lots of adjustments. And he'd get every Gose he could find from other countries. And he really dialed it in. Really fantastic. He makes a tequila Gose, tequila barrel-aged Gose out of this world to die for. Anyways, and one of the things that we're always working on was the amount of salt, the amount of coriander. And I find a lot of breweries will do a whole bunch of salt and a whole bunch of coriander because it's America, and if we're doing a little, it's good to do a lot. And so I don't like that. I think that there needs to be a balance, and it needs to be kind of a subtle background thing. If you taste salt, you've probably gone too far. What's your take on this? And what's a good starting point for people to just, take a shot at brewing a good Gose at home?
I think you are 100% correct that, subtlety, a light hand in almost everything for brewing. I mean, our job as brewers is to make a beverage that you want to have another one of.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of at our brewery, that's our guideline. If no matter what the beer is, you serve it in whatever glass size. But if at the bottom of that glass, you don't think that was good, I'd have another one of those, or, I'll have another one of those after a while. If you don't think that, you missed your mark, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
A beer that has too much salt or too much coriander or, too much sour,
Mm-hmm.
if you get halfway through the glass and you think I want something else, that brewer missed their mark, in my opinion. I mean, those are interesting beers sometimes, but as a professional brewer, you want people to have more than one. So you have to be even-handed. And we use a little bit of coriander in all our Goses, but you can't really tell. It's there in the background. It's underneath. I think it's a supporting player. And I think that's often important in a lot of the ingredients that you use. You want them to support the flavors of the yeast, the malt, and for some beers, the hops.
Mm-hmm.
And, those players take, front center stage at different times, but you don't want a beer that's all hops with
Mm-hmm.
no malt backbone. You don't want a beer that has no hops at all. At least I don't. And so you got to be even-handed. Of course, you made the perfect analogy that, when in America, inevitably someone is going to want to make it so salty it tastes like, blood or salt shaker. And so when we got to that point, there was a lot of discussion. We do a lot of our beers, we design them in a group, in a team. And so we're sitting around discussing how much salt. And, one guy's like, I hate salt, I don't want any. And another person was like, I think it should be like, crazy salty, because we really want it to be like Gose salt. And I was like, and we couldn't come to a conclusion. And I had my own opinion, and I didn't want to kind of force it on everybody. Ultimately, my opinion was right, of course, but but I thought it should be, subtly done. Mm-hmm. And we ended up using more than I probably would have. But what we did was we made up, I think, 5 samples from no salt to crazy salt. Mm-hmm. And on a Friday, we set them all up in front of our pub, and everybody who came in had to try all 5 samples and mark which one they liked the best. Mm-hmm. And we decided the one that got the most votes would be where we put it. Yeah. And shockingly, it was right in the middle, your bell curve. And so we came up with 3.4 grams per gallon of salt. And I love mixing, metric with American. You get grams per gallon. I can let you do that calculation at home. And that's kind of what we decided was a good amount. Yeah. And so that's where we go. And that you taste the salt in our Goses, but it isn't a beer that you'd grab and you think, whoa, salty.
Right.
It comes more in a gentle salinity, a kind of mineral quality.
Yeah, that's a little less than 1 pound per barrel.
Yeah.
You go, John, with the quick calculation.
I have it all calculated out here somewhere.
Right.
But,
yeah. And where can people get the Gose book?
It's all over online, and of course they can always email me, and I'll send you one for a reasonable price. I believe you can get the Brewers Association who published it. I like to go to bookfinder.com for all my books, because they're an aggregate for smaller used and new bookstores, and bookfinder.com will put you in touch with whoever. They also now aggregate in Amazon, who I'm not a fan of. So, you can buy from them if you want to, but you should really be supporting a local small bookstore somewhere, even if it's in England.
There you go. All right.
Thanks.
One last question before we go. Has to do with coriander. So one of the things I learned about coriander from the distilling side of things is that, and actually what kind of got me on this road was at Fuller's, we went to Sipsmith, which is the distillery that makes gin in like the Fuller's parking lot, right? And we needed some coriander they were talking about the different kinds of coriander, and one of the things they use is really small seed coriander, and whatever that is, it has a much greater lemon character to it, citrus character, versus kind of the peppery, earthy kind of thing that you think of coriander. In the U.S., we think more of that, and the larger seeds tend to be more like that, and the smaller the seed, the more lemony, citrusy they are. Are you paying attention to your coriander supply and which one you use? And I ended up buying like all the coriander I could get from different suppliers, and then kind of figuring out which one was the most lemony for our gins. So I have some excess coriander if you ever need some.
Well, we don't put a lot in there because I didn't want it to be a feature of the beer. I wanted it to be a supporting player. And we went through some different varieties, and I don't remember the one we ultimately selected, but it was one that had a lot of that kind of, like you say, a lemony note. And I thought that supported the sourness nicely. Some people don't like coriander. And for me, there's this kind of, in the stuff you get in the US, there's this a floral character that I don't like as much.
Some people say soapy
for me. And so I wanted to avoid that. So we used one that gave you a little more of that lemon note. And there are lots of varieties. And I was surprised at how much there was. And initially we wanted to get something that, was a European variety because, Gose came from the continent. And I think ultimately we went with one that came from India. So,
there you go.
Flavor.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Val. And you're able to stick around for a Q&A show as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to wrap this show up. And if you're listening live, stay tuned. We're going to have another Brew Strong episode right after this, where we're going to do some Q&A and some barrel questions that John has. And we'll do all that with our good friend Val Allen, who's graciously agreed to stick around with us. We're going to take a short break. This is an opportunity to go pee or get yourself a beer, whatever that might be. For those of you listening on the podcast, it's going to be a couple of weeks before you get the next episode. But until then, everybody, brew strong.
Strong.